so much for having me. I'm going to use this one. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is the research project that we're doing at the Center for Urban Waters. How many folks know where that is? Excellent, that's a really great news. Right across the waterway here at the Center for Urban Waters, and there's three groups that exist in that building. There's the City of Tacoma's Environmental Services, there is the Puget Sound Partnership, and also the University of Washington, Tacoma. And I work with the University of Washington, Tacoma. Hey, there we go. I'm so loud that I didn't even know the microphone was off. Excellent. So how many folks have seen this picture or seen this vision or this view before? Been out from the commencement bay. So this is where I get to work. I'm the luckiest person in this room. I get to work on the Puget Sound, and I get to work with wonderful groups of people and collaborate to basically analyze our samples and try to figure out the distributions of microplastics in Puget Sound. So this is definitely a talk about more of a collaboration than really the details and the data of our research. So this is where I work. This is the Center for Urban Waters. And as you can see here, this is our building. This is right at the edge here, right by all of the gas tanks. We're right in the middle there. And we are an urban waters research group, so we have this beautiful little dock here. And a friend of mine was actually walking across 11th Street Bridge before they closed it down, and she saw, at this time in the morning, me and a bunch of my students were actually collecting samples on the Bay of Foss right here. So this is the little manta net I'm going to talk to you about, just like a manta ray, and this is the little boat that we go out on. And in fact, we go on several different vessels to do our research. So very briefly, I'm going to talk to you guys about our research project. I'm going to review our sampling techniques, because that's what scientists do, so I'll keep you guys really, let you know how we actually do the collecting and analyzing. And then I want to introduce you to some really great partners that have contributed a lot of data to our project. And then we'll review their contributions more at a qualitative level, looking at more how they contributed numbers and data points than actually analyzing the data for you this morning. And then finally, I want to discuss the benefits and challenges to work with citizen scientists with primary research at the university. So, this sample, actually, I think I'm going to use this one. I feel like can you guys hear me okay? Oh, yeah. All right, this is much better. So here is a typical sample here of water that was collected in the Bay of Foss. And notice that there's little bits of things in here. It's all plastic. So basically, we were asked by NOAA's Marine Debris Program to come up with a method to quantify all plastic in the ocean. So really what they were asking us is not to really find out how much plastic's in the ocean, but really to come up with methods that we could develop in our laboratory here in Tacoma, Washington, that we share with the international community so that we can come together and create models and understand the marine debris problem within the ocean environment. So plastics themselves are essentially any material that is comprised of polymers, okay? A bunch of carbons and hydrogens joined together in different orientations to create plastics. Everything in this room here is basic, well not everything in this room, but there's a number of things in this room that are plastic. So this isn't a don't use plastic talk, it's more let's talk about plastics and understand why it persists in the ocean environment. So primary plastics are anything that was manufactured for its use. It can be our glasses, it can be a plastic water bottle, or it can be these things here. Does anybody know what these things here are? You heard of this term? Yeah, they're like these little beanie babies, you know. But these are actually pre-production plastic pellets. And you might have heard it maybe in the news as nurdles. I love saying that word, nurdles. But these things, you actually see them quite a bit, unfortunately, on our ocean beaches, and within the water, and also within beach sediment, or excuse me, bed sediment. So they're also called mermaid tears. So if you walk, I've seen this, if you go to Clackwoods, or not Clackwoods, Clay Lodge and go to the West Coast, I've seen like lines and lines of these little plastic production pellets. Secondary pellets, or secondary plastics, I should say, or anything that is broken down from a primary plastic. They kind of look like this, just little bits of stuff, okay, that have been broken down. And unfortunately, or fortunately, plastic was manufactured to be persistent, to last for a very long time, to replace other types of resources like wood and that kind of stuff, to be used to be very persistent, to kind of replace some of the missing, I don't want to say, materials. Okay, so let's talk about plastics. So I actually look at microplastics. And microplastics are anything that are from 0.33 millimeters to 5 millimeters. Okay, that's what I look for. And those are basically anything that's the width of a pin, okay, to the width of a pencil. That's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at plastics in the environment. And they look pretty much like this. So what we do is we actually go out and we use something called a manta net. So this is a manta net here. It basically floats on the surface of the water. Connected to it is a a plankton type net. It's the mesh size. If you look in between the holes within this mesh, they're about 335 microns, or the width of a pin. And we basically drag it through the water for about 15 minutes, between half a meter per second, to 4.5 meters per second. It's pretty fast. And then we sieve it in the field, and then we transport it back to the laboratory in ice. So without going into a lot of detail, we take the sample, we dry it in an oven, we pour hydrogen peroxide, very concentrated hydrogen peroxide, on the sample to basically dissolve, or oxidize, I should say, all of the labile organic materials, so any of the grasses, the plankton, etc. And what we're left with is plastic. Okay, so these are some of the partners that we've used to collect the data for our project. Okay, so this is Bellarmine Preparatory School, the Seattle Aquarium, North Seattle Community College, Jason Lee Middle School, and NOAA's Marine Debris Program. The two people I want to introduce, or groups I want to introduce today, are C. C is a service education adventure. They're out of Whidbey Island. And the other one is Sound Experience. Has anybody seen the sailboat in Commencement Bay before? It's beautiful. They'll be here in a couple more weeks. So, has anybody seen this boat before? You guys are on the Commencement Bay. This is the Indigo. And basically, the Indigo is a boat-based environmental education group. And this is their boat. Service Education Adventure is out of, like I said, Whidbey Island. It was started by two people named Chris Burke and Susie Richards. And they basically wanted to get citizens and students and teachers out on the water to understand issues with respect to Puget Sound environmental issues, plus looking at watershed issues. The other group is Sound Experience, and this is their sailboat. This is the Adventurous. Okay? And they go around Puget Sound also with the same missions, to go out and to teach people about environmental education on the water. So essentially they'll get anybody, both groups will get anybody out onto the water and teach them about environmental issues, and they wanted to get involved in our research. So the first group, the C group, they actually came up, or they got some private funding and they purchased the manta net. And so they, as a part of one of their rotations, goes out and collects samples for us, sends them to the laboratory, and my undergraduate students actually process the sample, and then we give them back the data, and they contribute to our primary research. What's kind of cool about the Adventurous, or Sound Experience, is they got a grant from Ben & Jerry's. Kind of cool. So Ben & Jerry's paid for their manta net to go out and do the sampling for us. So one of the owners, or actually the owner of a lot of the Ben & Jerry's here in the Puget Sound, donated money to purchase the net, and they're contributing samples to our research project. So far, since 2010, we've collected over 294 samples, which seems maybe not a lot, but imagine we have to get out in a boat, we have to collect samples, and it takes about 2 to 3 hours of boat time, physical time out in the boat, just to collect one sample. So that's a lot of time. I personally, with my undergraduate students and graduate students, have Collected about 171 of those samples. This is a real distribution, or where we've sampled. So because I work in sedimentology, I'm looking at Alexandria and Catanella. I'm actually out on the water quite a bit. So while I'm out in the water, I always ask the captain, like, hey, can I put that net in and collect some microplastic samples? I'm like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. So I collect some of the samples. So we've got southern Puget Sound all the way up into the east side of Vancouver Island, the west side of Vancouver Island. So I have a pretty good distribution area. But as a scientist, more data is better for your research project. So Service Education and Venture has contributed 89 samples to our project. So this is the original map. Just from those 89 samples, look at that. Look at how many samples have been contributed to our research. That's amazing. I couldn't get there. I don't have enough time to go and collect those samples. That's pretty cool. Now, Sound Experience has only been a partner with us for only a couple of years, and so, or actually not even a couple of years, it's just 1 year. They actually collected 34 samples for us. And so if you look at the same map as before, and then look at their contributions. It's kind of hard to see in this room, but you can see here, they've contributed these little pink little areas here. So we have a little bit more up here in the San Juans and a little bit more down here in southern Puget Sound. That's amazing. I couldn't do that. And it's for free. And it's from people who are really excited about contributing to primary research. That's pretty neat. So, this is a picture here of a couple of students that are looking at a plastic sample. This is a Girls on the Helm. So we do a 3-day cruise up in the San Juans. And we bring basically all-girl cruise. The crew is all girls, all the scientists are all girls. And then we also bring the young ladies with us, and we actually go out and collect. And so these are two gals that are looking at a plastic sample that we collected off of San Juan Island. Okay. So what are the benefits? Why is it great for us to have these groups contribute to our research, and what's their benefit? Well, we increase our sample numbers, and that's really, really important to have to collect a large data set. Okay. We expose the public to basically have them understand their contribution to plastics pollution in the Puget Sound. And it's not always, I think it's always never on purpose, but understanding how you can change some of your behaviors to prevent plastics from being dumped into the Puget Sound. You get a lot of experience. We have people actually handling research nets and handling research samples and contributing them to we're actually sending them to the Center for Urban Waters. And then they have access to data. So I produce these maps where we actually show the locations where people, or the groups were actually sampling, and if they click on this map, or this little icon here, they can see this was Mrs. Moore's 5th grade class from Voyager Elementary. Isn't that cool? So the students actually go out for a day, they are exposed to the research and actually doing the sampling, and then I actually let them have their data back, and that's kind of unusual. And I tell them how much we, actually I give them the latitude and longitude where we were. Half the people, when they're on the boats, are like, I don't even know where I am. So I tell them where they are. We did this at Liberty Bay, give them a latitude and longitude, the volume that was sampled, how much plastic we found. Okay, in 70,000 liters, there's 0.8 micrograms or milligrams, excuse me, of plastics. And then I talk about the concentration and give them the dry mass too. Okay, this is actually a picture for one of the students after one of our rotations, and I love these pictures. We get a lot of these drawings at the end. Express for us what you learned while you were out on the boat. And typically they're about the plastic rotations that are on the boat. So what are some of the challenges? Well, they're not really scientists, but I would argue that everybody is a scientist. Anybody that's interested in collecting data and answering questions are all scientists. So, and I actually go out and train all of the groups, or actually the educators on the boats, how to do the sampling. Sometimes I'll get just a jar. Here's a jar. Thanks for collecting that sample. I don't know where it came from, you know. Sometimes it'll just have a date on it, or it'll say Mrs. Smith's class, okay? So sometimes the information is missing. So I don't have a latitude and longitude. I don't know where it came from. I'm not sure how much was sampled. But I actually look at that as kind of a silver lining. A silver lining, because that actually is a sample that I can bring people like you into the Center for Urban Waters and do a demonstration. Okay? Or have you guys learn the analysis. Or any other group that comes into our laboratory. And actually, there are also samples that I can have use for students to learn how to do the analysis without kind of maybe ruining a sample that would be useful. Okay? So the other thing I wanted to talk about is error. So if we look at the number of samples that were collected with error, for Service Education Adventure, they've collected over 89 samples. 23 of those came in with error. But again, not a problem. Now I have 23 samples that I can teach other students and do demonstrations in the laboratory for visiting groups. And then for Service Education Adventure, I think they had 34. Only 4 of them came back with error. Okay? So I had to basically get rid of those data points, but still, it's not a big deal. We can actually use those samples and they won't go to waste. Okay, well, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to, of course, I have to recognize NOAA's Marine Debris Program for sponsoring and funding our research. And this is our research team out at the Center for Urban Waters in the University of Washington, Tacoma. Here's Troy. And these are my freshmen. So I actually have a class that I get to teach called Introduction to Science. And one of the things that I do is I take at least 20 to 42 students out on the ocean, or excuse me, in Puget Sound every quarter and expose them to the research that we're doing. And they're doing some really good work, and I also can kind of recruit them for doing their senior projects with me. Okay. Any questions?